Welcome to Scary Stories. As you can probably hear, maybe, I don't know, there's loud construction going on in Bigfoot's building today, and it's too loud to record much that's new. Instead, I thought this might be a good time to present this collection of weird Dogman stories I found from back in 2018. This was a period where Peter was reading the stories too quietly, like whispering. I wish I could find those scripts and reread them on a quiet day. Anyway, we were also experimenting with having one of us animated hosts read the entire story to you on camera back then. This period didn't last too long, but we've got around 2 hours of it preserved in amber for you right now. Get your popcorn ready. It's time for 2 more hours of scary Dogman stories from 2018. Roll it, Smokey.
October Dogman in the Apple Orchard, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was a kid, there used to be an apple orchard, I think around McDonald, Pennsylvania, if memory serves me, that my family would drive to in the autumn. My parents would pay some fee, then we were allowed to pick as many apples as we wanted. It might not sound exciting compared to video games, but it was something we always looked forward to each year. Part of it was the drive up and back, getting to see all the trees along the way, each of them colored slightly differently from the next one, no two alike. That was my favorite part of the trip, the wonder of so many trees, mostly of the same species in each area, yet every single one of them a completely unique individual, the same as people are. Then, getting to pick and eat apples, something created specifically for us to eat, a bribe offered to us by nature. We'll give you something sweet that prevents your starvation, and in return, you spread our seed far and wide. The yearly trips had the effect of reassuring us that life was a gift, and that we were the lucky recipients, that this world was created as a garden for our enjoyment. They added to our contentment as a family. That is, until the year I encountered a Dogman in the apple orchard. I think our experiences can shape our worldview as much as our imaginations and philosophies. People who grow up in hellish environments understand the dark side of life, and those who have been raised in a loving environment can better appreciate the light. A mature worldview includes both and every shade in between, but most often the lessons which allow us to see more broadly are painful ones. Some things can only be seen through scarred eyes. In my case, my greatest teacher was the Dogman. He shattered my comfortable worldview. He destroyed my every preconception of how the world works. He deflated my sense of importance and the importance of our entire species. Dogman demonstrated to me that we are not on the top of the food chain. This world was not created just for us. So, this is what happened as well as I can remember it. It was a warm day for October, and my sister and I were racing around more than usual. We had gone to the orchard for I think 5 years by that point. I was 11, so that sounds about right. We both felt safe there, like it was an extension of our own backyard. Our parents didn't even tell us not to get lost anymore like they used to. We would get there right as they opened, and the crowd wouldn't usually start showing up till we were getting ready to leave. We basically had our run of the place, so Mom and Dad would go in one direction, and my sister and I would charge off in another. This time, we decided to run all the way till we found the end of the orchard. Then try to get one apple from each tree on the way back. It was a game that kids make up, that sort of thing. We kept running, then we got winded, and we walked for a while, but we still hadn't found the end of the orchard. My sister was getting scared and started to say she wanted to go back. Just then, the sky lit up and was almost immediately followed by the loudest thunder either of us had ever heard. That meant that lightning must have been very close. Sure enough, the skies darkened quickly and it looked like rain was going to be coming soon. My sister was now utterly freaked out and begged me to please walk her back to her mother. I really wanted to keep looking for the edge of the orchard, but I didn't want to deal with her crying, so I agreed that we should turn back. All at once, this thing jumped out of a tree, and my sister ran past me screaming. I hadn't even seen what it was yet, and she was already gone from the scene. When I saw what she had seen, though, I was right behind her, and soon passing her. I'll try to explain what I saw, because I only saw it for maybe 1 or 2 seconds, maybe not even 1 second. It's been so many years since this happened that I wonder myself how much of what I remember comes from the original event and how much comes from the constant retelling of the story ever since I was a kid. I must have told this story 100 times in all these years. That having been said, every time I talk about this, I get shivers and the hair on my arm stands on end. To me, this all feels like it just happened yesterday. So I was looking over my sister's head and saw something large and heavy drop out of the tree. It was just a grayish blur and I couldn't make out any detail. I heard it land, but did not see it land because my sister was blocking my view. When she pushed past me to run back to our parents, I finally saw it in full, from its hairy legs up to its pointed ears, on top of its canine-looking head. This was a big black dog, but it was standing up like the big bad wolf from that old Disney cartoon. It looked evil in that same cartoonish way, like something that did bad things just because it wanted to. It drew its lip back and growled at me, standing tall at the shoulder, but lowering its head into a threatening pose. The teeth were just ridiculous, just absurdly long. It looked like something had walked out of a nightmare into the apple orchard. That was all I needed to see, so I ran. When people ask me the color, I say I remember it being gray. The fur was like that of a wolf, but more of a solid gray color. People ask me if it had hands, or claws, or paws, or what, but I honestly don't remember that part. I'm not sure I ever thought to look at the paws because I was staring at the teeth and noticing the terrifying body language and facial expressions. People also ask me if its eyes were red or yellow or orange, and I don't remember that part either. I thought of it as a dog monster, so I guess it must have had dog-like eyes. I don't remember them glowing or anything like that, which doesn't mean they weren't. I guess the eyes were dark as far as I can remember. I probably wasn't making eye contact. I think even as a kid, I knew not to make eye contact with an angry dog. So, we ran back to our parents, convinced that the Dogman was chasing us the entire way. I never looked back, so I don't know. When we finally found Mom and Dad, they laughed at our story. But on our way out, Mom told the people at the entrance that her kids saw a wild dog out in the orchard, so maybe they might want to check it out. I think they ignored her or humored her or something like that. Right after we started driving away, the skies opened up and the rain started coming down so hard that Dad pulled off the road for a while, and we waited till the worst of it blew over before we drove the rest of the way home. It was during the hardest part of the rain that my sister started pointing out her window in the back. She was screaming that the Dogman was running past. I looked, and there was someone or something running past us at the edge of the woods. With all the wind and rain, I literally couldn't tell what I was looking at. It might have been the Dogman. It might have been a pedestrian caught in the storm. It could have been Smokey the Bear for all I could tell. Once the rain calmed down, both of us watched outside for the rest of the drive. We were certain we were going to see that monster again, and we wanted our parents to see it with us this time. But instead, life decided that we would never see a Dogman again, either one of us. And so that's my story of the time I saw Dogman in the apple orchard. Don't go away, we've got a new Dogman story read by Madeline Starr coming right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Locked in a car with Dogman outside. As told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. This is a story about an experience I had in college that was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. At the time, I wasn't sure I would live to tell anyone what happened. This is about the one and only time I ever saw a Dogman. But I didn't just see it. I got screamed at and menaced by it for almost 20 minutes. I hadn't known the Dogman had become famous until my granddaughter told me recently. I asked her what she was listening to on her Walkman, and she explained that first of all, it was her phone, and second of all, she was watching a video about Dogman. I thought that was a cartoon character, but she straightened me out quickly that Dogman is a kind of werewolf or wolf-headed ape man, and that it's not a cartoon but very, very real. I flashed back to 52 years ago, when I saw a creature like that. I hadn't heard the term Dogman in those days, and I hadn't thought of it as a werewolf either. I guess I just called it a monster. It's not a thing you'd bring up in conversation unless you want everyone to think you're crazy. I just celebrated my 70th birthday, though, so I no longer care what anybody thinks of me. And I'm ready to tell this story I've mostly held inside myself all these years. Back then I was 18 and I was dating a boy in my college. Actually, now that I think about it, the date must have been 1968 when I was 20. That would be 50 years ago, not 52. I remember this because the boy I dated had his own apartment in Pleasant Valley, New York. I used to think of him when I heard the Monkees' song, Pleasant Valley Sunday. And I just learned from the internet that the song didn't come out until 1967. So I think I started dating that boy. Let's call him Nez, because he was a huge Michael Nesmith fan and wore a wool hat to look like Mike. When I was 19 and 20, and that would place this all in 1967 or 68, I eventually broke up with this boy because he was always promising me things to get me to go out with him, then substituting something far less cool. In fact, that's exactly how my Dogman story starts. Nez called me up and told me he wanted to take me to the movies, but not just any place. He wanted to take me to the coolest theater he knew. I, of course, said yes, and I went shopping to get a nice dress to wear on the date. He picked me up in his noisy car that always seemed to need a new muffler and proceeded to drive me to this patch of dirt on a hill overlooking a drive-in movie theater. I asked why we were parking in the middle of nowhere, and he told me the view from here was better than the view for the people who paid to go inside the drive-in theater. So he wasn't taking me to the movies at all. He was taking me to the forest where we could watch a film with no sound. This is what I got dressed up for. Obviously, being a young man, he tried to snuggle with me, but I was not in the mood. I wonder why. After a while, he said he had to go do his private business, and he walked off into the woods, leaving me in the car alone. Now, looking around, I wasn't just bored and annoyed. I was starting to get kind of scared. It was really creepy out there at night. Upstate New York is very beautiful, and I tried to remind myself of that. But all I could think of is that campfire story about the man with the hook instead of a hand and the couple parked in Lover's Lane. Except at the end of that story, the boy drives away from the killer. My boy had left the driver's seat for parts unknown. I looked to see if he had left the keys in the ignition, but he had taken them with him. I couldn't get out of here, even if I wanted to. Nervously, I leaned over and locked the driver's seat door and checked to see that both back doors were locked as well. Something caught my eye out of the rear window, and I did what they used to call a double take. There was a man standing outside behind the car. He was walking toward my window, emerging from the darkness into the moonlight. My eyes widened and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a male, all right, but this was not a man. Not in the conventional sense, anyway. This was a hairy monster. I had read stories in the newspapers about monsters that haunted lovers' lanes, but I always thought, or hoped, that they weren't real. I figured they were the kinds of stories parents tell their kids to scare them into behaving. This thing caught sight of me in the car and nearly flew the last steps until it was right against my side window, breath fogging up my windshield, even though the night should have been too warm for that. This thing leaned down and pressed its forehead hard into the glass, making its ugly face even more terrifying in the process. It was a dog head, but some kind of devil of a dog, not a normal one. Its eyes shone in a way that a cat's eyes will shine when they stand in the dark and you photograph them with your flash turned on. Except this is what this dog-headed monster's eyes looked like to my naked eye. It slobbered like a dog, panting furiously in the way a dog does. Its front legs and back legs looked like thicker versions of a normal dog, except the front paws splayed out on my window to look more like hands or claws. The thumb was separated from the other fingers, but it wasn't a fully human-looking hand. I did suspect it could probably pick things up with those claws, though. It was like a dog, but like a monster at the same time, and it was angry at me. Unable to get through my side window, it jumped on the hood, and it howled. Then it began beating on the front windshield with both claws balled up into fists, beating with the sides of its hands. I want to tell you I behaved bravely like the feminist icon I am. But in reality, I screamed a whole lot. I thought this was the end for me. I actually saw my life flash in front of my eyes like they talk about in books. I saw everything I had ever done, and I knew I wasn't ready to go. I wanted to get out of this, but the only thing I could do was sit there and pray the monster would go away. There was a sound of a big crash in the woods, and the dog-headed monster looked in that direction, then bounced off into the trees to investigate the noise. I figured it was Nez, and that he was a goner now. Instead, Nez came running up from the opposite direction, panicked looking. I unlocked the door and he threw himself in, thrusting the key in the ignition all in one move. He was pulling the car out of the spot before he even got his door closed, and I thought we were finally safe. I was very wrong. The dog monster raced out of the forest toward the car, grabbing Nez's door and flinging it open before losing its grip on the door handle. We drove backwards onto the road behind us and spun out as Nez tried to make a right turn at too high a velocity. I could see the dogman running toward us, and he was catching up. Just as it made a leap to grab onto our bumper, the wheels found traction and we screeched and sped out of there. Nez closed his door doing 65 on the highway, and we finally discussed what had happened. He threw the rock I heard to distract the werewolf, then beat it into the car. I was glad he was okay, but in a way I sort of blamed him for everything that had happened. The resentments built and eventually led to our breakup. It wasn't that he didn't have money to spend. It was that he would bait and switch to trick me into doing things. I probably would have gone anyway if he had been honest, but I wouldn't have felt lied to. I eventually married a man of very modest means, but he was honest. I was very loyal to him and encouraged him, so by the time we were in our 30s, he had become very successful. Although he was only 62 when he left us, he had spent his entire life telling me the truth, and I will always miss him. But I'll tell you who I will never miss, and that is the Dogman.
The Dogman of Brooklyn Janus Road, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. This is a story about the Loup-garou, or the Rougarou, or the Dogman. It didn't happen in Louisiana, but it happened pretty close by. As in many sightings of this creature, there is a spiritual or religious element to the event that makes it seem as though what I witnessed was not just an animal, but some sort of entity or presence, possibly of an evil nature. This all went down in Brooklyn, Mississippi, right near the National Forest over there. My family had attended a particular chapel for years, but when I got old enough to drive and vote, I decided I didn't want to go to church anymore. My parents were sad, but they viewed it as my right to do what I wanted with my own life, so we all just tried not to talk about it and not let it affect our relationships and lives. After a while, I started to feel as though I was missing out on something, and I sort of wanted to rejoin my family on Sundays. I was a very proud young man, though, and I was too embarrassed to admit that maybe I had made a mistake. This might not seem like it has anything to do with Dogman, but I think that in a way, it might. So, in the middle of this situation, I was driving home one night and I ran out of gas. It wasn't that I didn't have money for gas. It was that I was so preoccupied with so many different things that I wasn't paying attention to what was right in front of me. I was able to pull the car off the road and roll to a stop. Then I just put my head down on the steering wheel and gave up for a little while. I wondered whether I should walk back to the last gas station, which would be quite a walk, or whether I should call my parents on my cell phone and have them come rescue me. I wasn't sure which would be less embarrassing. Then I looked up and saw where I was. I was parked across from the church I had quit. That seemed fitting somehow. I had run out of gas right by my family's chapel. I was sitting there in a kind of a state of amazement and awe at the nature of the universe and how everything seems to come full circle, whether we want it to or not, when something unbelievable happened. First of all, let me make it clear what I could and could not see from my vantage point right then. I could see this small swamp or pond just in front of me to my right. I could see the road, which is Brooklyn Janus Road, and I could see the chapel to my left, surrounded by trees. The forest is so thick around there that you can't see past the tree line. Now, I don't mean Janus Brooklyn Road, that's on the other side to the east. I mean Brooklyn Janus Road and the little chapel with the parking lot by that tiny swamp. So, like I said, something impossible happened then. I saw this man come up out of the swamp, walking from my right to my left. It just walked out like there was a staircase in the water and it was walking up from the basement. It was dripping all over, and at first I thought I was looking at the creature from the Black Lagoon. It walked straight upright like the monster did in that old movie, not hunched over like an ape or a caveman. After it got completely out of the water, it shook itself all over in the way a dog does, shaking water all over the place all around it and drying itself off a bit. That's when I could see that it was some kind of a dog-like creature. And my first thought was, Rougarou. It walked out onto the highway and shook itself again, leaving a wet spot on the pavement. I don't think he noticed me. If he did, he decided to ignore me because he never turned in my direction. For my part, I was ducked down, hiding behind my steering wheel and peeking out. When it got into the road, I could see it a bit better, and I could swear it was colored green, more so on its bottom than on its top. The head was the least green, and the feet were the most green. I figured that creature must spend a lot of time in the swamps around here, and that's probably algae making it look green. The thing had ears that stood up on its head, and its face looked like a wolf. Its back legs looked like wolf legs. It must have been around 6 feet tall from its feet to its forehead. It had a tail like a whip tail, which swatted at the air like it was trying to hit bugs. Maybe it was. I'm lucky that I was just a bit too far away to get a good whiff of the thing. Once it entered the road, I felt a terrible fear inside that it was going to the church. I worried that it would do something to that church and that I was going to be forced to witness it. Somehow this desecration was going to be my fault. I realized I did still care about my faith and that I'd given up too soon. I resolved that if I got home that night all right, I would repent and rejoin my family. The Rougarou altered its path slightly, and instead of going toward the church, it went into the woods past the church and out of my view. I waited a while to see if it would come back. When it didn't, I called my dad on my cell, or I tried to. I couldn't get a call to go through, so I texted him, and fortunately that made it to his phone. The cell reception can sometimes get weird out there. It's usually okay, but not always, and I don't know why. Maybe Dogman interferes with Wi-Fi or something. Anyway, when my dad got out there with some gas for me, he had an angry look on his face. Before he could say a word, I broke down and cried. and I told him everything that had just happened. When I was done, he looked at me with compassion and told me that the Lord had shown me an agent of the devil and that it had made me repent. He told me it wasn't my forgetfulness that led to me running out of gas. It was God making me forgetful so that I could learn this lesson. We hugged and then we prayed together right there on that road. We knew there were rougarou in those woods, yet we prayed anyhow. I guess we prayed because of that. It was very moving and beyond my ability to fully understand. My family moved a couple years ago, so we don't go to that church anymore. We found one closer to where we now live. I still don't go as often as the others. I admit I find it can be really boring sometimes. But never since that night has my faith ever wavered again. And I have to say that in all honesty, I only learned that lesson because of the Dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The Dogman that tapped on my window, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. My family had a Dogman problem for months before we realized we did. We thought for the longest time that we were haunted. That might sound a little strange, but if I go back to the start, it will make more sense. We moved in during my junior year at high school, and I moved out when I went to college. The rest of my family still lives there, but I'm hoping to stay on my own and only go back for visits. I think I'm the most creeped out by the Dogman. My parents and sister seem to be able to block it out more. I think their attitude is that there are no stories in the news about Dogman hurting people, so therefore they will be safe as long as they ignore the situation. Maybe it's a sign that they've given up and accept the Dogman, or maybe they realize they just can't win against it. When we all thought we were haunted, however, my parents were very proactive and called in a local Pennsylvania ghost hunting team, whose name I won't mention. We brought the ghost hunters to our living room and explained how sometimes at night when we were watching TV, we would hear a loud rap from one side of the house, then almost immediately a loud rap from the other side, as though the ghosts in the walls were communicating with each other. Then we brought them to my room, where I explained how at night something would come up to my window and tap on it. I never had the nerve to get up and look out because I was too afraid to see whatever it was. I knew it wasn't a tree because there are no trees or bushes on that side of the house. And because of the nature of the land and construction of the building, even though my bedroom is on the first floor, the bottom of my window is around 7 feet off the ground. The land comes up much higher in the front and dips down in the back. The ghost hunters set up video cameras and did EVP sessions, and nothing at all weird happened to them all night long. They caught nothing of interest in the video, and they told us they had no clue as to what we were experiencing, but they found zero evidence of the paranormal on our property. The next night, the rapping on the walls returned, and the tapping on my window as well. I had started to become an insomniac, and I wasn't doing well at school anymore. I was starting to feel sick every day. Finally, my father decided he and Mom would switch bedrooms with me, and he would deal with whatever was causing this problem on his own. Mom hated this idea, so Dad actually put her up in a hotel for a week. He figured he'd get it all figured out in that amount of time or less. Dad is a very hands-on kind of guy. He's handy with a wrench, and he can fix plumbing, electricity, and computers by using his toolkit and some YouTube videos. So I don't think it was the first night, but the second or third night when I woke up to the sound of my father screaming like someone had stepped on his foot really hard. It was the strangest shout I'd ever heard from anyone, and I bolted out of bed in a second. I knew I should run into the room and see what had happened, but at first, my feet wouldn't move. My father is a lot braver than I am, and if whatever was in there made him shout like that, it might make me drop dead of fright. Then my father screamed again, more like a threatening growl this time than a frightened cry. Instincts and adrenaline carried me into my old bedroom, and I saw my father standing next to my bed, facing the window, holding a chair over his head as though he were going to throw it straight through the glass. When I looked out of that window, what I saw was not a ghost or an apparition at all. It was some kind of an animal. A dark, hairy beast with broad shoulders, lumbering away from the window and back toward the forest where I assumed it had come from. I ran around my father and flung open the window, thrusting my head outside. I needed to see it with my own two eyes. It was going to be completely gone in a half second, and I didn't want to miss my chance to see what had been tormenting me for so long. The sound of me opening the window caused the creature to stop in its tracks and stand perfectly still. I gasped audibly as I realized I probably shouldn't have stuck my head out this window on that night. I probably should have stayed in bed and pretended to be asleep. As though smelling my fear and self-doubt, the creature turned around fully in one swift moment, then stood up to its tallest height. This thing was immense. It looked like a wolf that stood like a man in one sense, but it looked like a furry dinosaur in another. I mean, if you could picture an 8 or 9 foot tall tyrannosaur with longer arms and huger front claws, then shrink the head just a little and put wolf ears on top, you'd get the basic outline of this figure I saw. It looked like it could run 25 or 30 miles an hour on its hind legs, and probably go faster if it decided to drop to all fours. In that sense, it was even deadlier than a living tyrannosaur might be. The creature looked me right in the eyes, made a kind of loud inhaling noise, then charged toward my window so fast that it was almost like he was willing himself in front of me. I barely got the window shut before he was there, steaming up the glass as I ran back to my bedroom. I heard Dad screaming at it, but I didn't go back in that room. I don't think I've ever gone back in that room. The dogman isn't interested in any of the other windows in the house, only that one for some reason. My sister is the one who solved the mystery of the wrapping on the house walls. One evening, she was driving home from shopping, and she literally saw one of these dogmen race out of the forest, slap the outer wall of the house very hard, then race straight off into another patch of woods. She imagined there must have been another one on the other side since they always did the wrapping in pairs. She said this was not a large monster like what my father and I had seen. This looked like a dark wolf. It ran on all fours, stood up, slapped at the house, then ran on its hind legs back to the forest. So all along it had been some kind of game of dare for the younger dogmen. How many creatures live in that area? It seems like a complete infestation to me. It's definitely not just one or two. For all we know, there might be an entire community of them living over there. Like I said before, I'm away at college now and hope to find work and someplace to live when school is done so that I never again have to spend even one more night at my family's house. I wish they would just sell, but all three of them insist that the dogman is the only thing they don't like about the house. He's not as frightening to them, or so they claim. I don't know. To me, that's just crazy. My father looked into the eyes of that thing the same as I did. He knows it's not a figment of the imagination. It's not a ghost. And it's not from another dimension. It's also not intelligent. It's just savage. And it looks hungry and mean. It's like some kind of hairy land shark. There's nothing good I can say about it, but the thing is definitely not supernatural or paranormal. It's just a kind of predator that's so skilled at avoiding humanity and hiding its own presence that it hasn't been formally identified by science yet. At least that's my personal opinion. I think my parents should sell that home, and I think they should sell it to some zoologists who can study these creatures and finally explain to me and to the rest of the world what exactly a dogman actually is. Welcome to Scary Stories. I'd like to kick it off with an all-new Dogman story. Dogman on a Country Lane, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Ever since my parents let me watch their old VHS tape of The Legend of Boggy Creek when I was 7 years old, I started having a recurring nightmare. It would start off happy and nice. I'd be walking along this road in the country with some friends. It was different each time as to who was around me, but it was the same location. I didn't recognize where I was, but it always felt familiar, like I had been there before. The dream would stretch on and on, with us walking and joking around on a sunny afternoon. We would pass a baseball field on the right and keep going. There were houses here and there, and then we'd pass this building that I called the barn on the left. I called it that because it looked like a barn, but I think it was being used for some other purpose. Maybe it actually used to be a barn. After we'd passed the barn, the mood would start to shift. it wouldn't feel fun anymore. It would feel this way that I had never felt in waking life. It was scary, but a kind of scary that I didn't have a name for. It was terrifying because we knew that we were being watched by someone or something that we couldn't see. It's not a comfortable feeling. Even the first time I had the dream, I could sense that something had changed. Something had somehow gone wrong. When we got to an area with a sort of a clearing on both sides of the road, we knew that whatever was watching us was doing so from the woods immediately past this field on my right. It was maybe 100 feet away, hidden in the trees. If we went any further, we'd be putting our lives in danger. And yet, we knew that we had to go in that direction. We had no choice. We either got past whoever or whatever was making us feel so frightened, or else we would die in the trying. There was no other possibility. And so, each time I turned to whichever friends I had with me in that version of the dream, and we all charged forward. And each time, out of the forest would leap something I would have to call a monster. It was not a Dogman in spite of the title of this story. It was more of an ape man or a caveman, maybe a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. It moved faster and more insanely than anything I'd ever seen in real life, and it was impossibly immense. I mean, maybe 18 or 20 feet tall, just a savage killing machine. Have you ever seen a video of a goat acting really crazy? If not, you should search for funny goat videos on YouTube. Although you'll laugh, you'll likely also get a bit creeped out, because goats are extremely weird. That's why people associate them with the devil. Well, this ape-like man, in my dream, would make sounds and gestures like the craziest of goats. Its tongue was out and flapping all around, and I can't begin to explain how scary it was to see and hear. This thing might possibly do anything. Every time the dream would lead to me racing through the woods trying to get away from the giant crazy Bigfoot. And every single time, it would end with the huge Sasquatch grabbing me by one ankle or the other and pulling me back to it. I would wake up screaming, falling out of my bed, and it never got any easier to deal with. It was just as terrible every single time. Not just for me, but also for my parents, who felt vaguely guilty about the whole thing. One year, we went to stay for the Halloween weekend with some cousins of ours out in Pennsylvania. The name of the town they lived in back then was Effort, Pennsylvania. I thought that was a funny name then, and I still do today. So one day I was walking with my cousins this long walk to a lake or something, I forget. I was walking with them, letting them lead the way, and not really paying attention until we came upon a baseball field to our right. It looked just like in my dream. I thought about saying something, but it didn't seem like a big enough coincidence to mention. And besides, I was out there to help me get past my nightmares, not to keep talking about them, so I bit my tongue and on we walked. Then, as you might have already guessed, I saw it off in the distance. No, not the monster. I saw the barn. It was ahead of us on the left. I started feeling kind of sick and I didn't want to go on, but I couldn't think of a way to tell the others without them thinking I was out of my head. I asked them what the name of the street we were on was. It was Gilbert Road. You can look it up on a map, Gilbert Road in Effort, Pennsylvania. Then we got to the area with a clearing on either side of the road, and my cousins stopped. One of them asked me if I felt something weird. I was amazed he sensed it too. Then I remembered, in my dream, someone else always noticed we were being watched when we got to that clearing. I agreed with him and I suggested we turn back. I was informed loudly and rudely that turning back was not an option. They hadn't showed me the place they wanted to show me yet. My youngest cousin said it was probably a raccoon or something, and he took a rock and threw it directly at the patch of woods that the Sasquatch monster always hid in every time in my dream. And then something from inside those woods screamed. I begged my cousins to run away, but they ran forward, excited that whatever they hit was something larger than a raccoon. Now I was the one thinking that they were insane. Suddenly, something emerged from the woods and with only 1 or 2 steps was directly in the middle of the road. It turned and glared at us, and I saw, in its entirety, from head to foot, something that looked nothing like the monster from my dreams. Yes, it was hairy. Yes, it stood like a man. But no, that was nothing like a caveman or Bigfoot standing there. That was a dog-headed creature. We were looking at some kind of wild werewolf. This was the Dogman of Pennsylvania. My heart was beating so fast I thought it was going to explode out of my chest. I took in the creature, aware that it might be the last thing I ever saw. The hair was gray in the sunlight. It was the same color all over. Its ears stood up on its head and came to points. I don't remember anything about its eyes. It held its paws in front of it the way a dog does when begging. I don't remember if there was anything unusual about the front claws. It looked like a long-haired dog or wolf, but it stood on its hind legs as though that were its normal way to travel. I could hear it growling even at that distance. I was so sad. I really didn't want to die. But now my dream had come to life, sort of, and that dream always ended exactly the same way. Then, without any warning at all, the Dogman sprinted off to our left, making it across the overgrown field and back into the forest so quickly, all I really saw after the first step was a blur. "He's as scared of us as we are of him," said my youngest cousin, and his older brother rapped him on the forehead in response. "That thing ain't afraid of nothing, you dimwit. We were just wasting his time, that's all." Then we walked on to wherever they were taking me, and everything was normal the rest of the day. And the rest of the night, too. I never had that dream ever again. And I also never agreed to go walking with those cousins ever again either. As far as I'm concerned, one time is more than enough times to encounter a Dogman on a country road.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. 2279. And now for something completely scary.
Dogman vs. Catwoman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. In the early 90s, I got a job in an office and my own studio apartment. I was in my early 20s and finally living far from my parents, which allowed me to feel truly independent for the first time. I got invited by a guy I thought was cute to join him at a Halloween party somewhere in New Jersey, and I accepted. I had always been a goody two-shoes, so I looked forward to picking out my first sexy Halloween costume. After a lot of deliberation, I decided to sew my own Catwoman costume. I recreated the crazy-looking fake leather suit she wore in that Michelle Pfeiffer movie. In the film, the costume is supposed to be hand-sewn by Catwoman herself after she goes insane. So it has deliberately visible stitch marks all over, and parts are held together with safety pins. It took a lot of planning to figure out how to get into and out of the thing, but when it was done, I was very proud of my work. I was excited to go out in something so scandalously form-fitting, but glad that since it was a first date, at least I'd be covered up entirely from head to foot. If I had known I would be meeting a Dogman that night, I might have chosen a different costume. So the guy came to get me, wearing a suit with a mustache painted on his face. I didn't comprehend his costume until the next day, when he explained that he was Groucho Marx, a film comedian from 100 years ago. I've seen some of his films since then. He was very funny, but at the time I didn't know who he was yet. Anyway, Groucho drove us to the party, which was at a venue alongside a highway in New Jersey. I told this story to friends for years, saying it happened in Bayonne, but I've been looking in that area in Google Maps, and I can't find any place that looks like where we were that night. This was 1992 or 93. So we're talking around 25 years ago, and things change. Maybe it was Bayonne, and maybe not, but it was definitely in New Jersey. I remember there was a parking lot and a big old bar. There were other businesses within sight of the parking lot up and down the highway, but they were all closed down and dark. The entire area seemed to have been cut out of the forest. So there were trees behind the establishment and trees across the two-lane highway. I don't remember streetlights, but there must have been some on the highway, because I can remember it being dark, but still easy to see where you were going. At first we were having fun, but it grew increasingly hot in there, at least to those of us wearing pleather cat suits and attached face masks. I made an excuse that I wanted to go outside and smoke a cigarette, and Groucho walked me out to his car where I had left the cigs. He tried to get romantic with me out in the parking lot, but I really needed some air because I had started to feel kind of ill. He took it the wrong way, left his car keys with me, and went back into the party, most likely to try his luck with someone else. It felt too hot in the car, so I locked it up and took a walk behind the bar toward the forest. It felt relaxing to listen to the crickets chirping in the woods. It made me feel normal again. It was amazing how dark it was in the woods, though. I walked right up to the edge of the trees and bushes, and I stared. I saw nothing but kept staring, trying to adjust my vision to the darkness. If nothing else, I was cooling off and feeling better. I probably owed Groucho an apology, even if he was being grouchy. That made me chuckle. Grouchy Groucho. I was about to turn and head back in when I heard a growling sound coming from, well, I almost said coming from behind me, but to be honest, it sounded more like it was coming from above me. I noticed that I was now covered in shadow, and I looked up. I found myself staring upside down at the face of the largest, tallest wolf that could possibly ever exist. I turned around quickly and backed up a few steps off of the parking lot into the forest itself. Now I could see that it wasn't just that the wolf was large, because he was. It was more that this wolf was standing on its hind legs like a bear. I tripped and fell backwards hard, but adrenaline sprang me back up and I moonwalked deeper into the forest to get away from that thing. The more I backed away from it, the brighter its eyes appeared to glow yellow. Now backlit by the neon and other lights on the bar, I could only make out the creature's immense silhouette and its glowing eyes shining out of the darkness. Its growling grew louder and it took a step forward. Unlike a bear, this creature seemed to be used to walking on its hind legs. I thought about running, but its movements were so graceful that I felt certain it could outrun me easily if it wanted to. I took a chance that it didn't want to. I turned and ran anyway. I didn't know where I was going and I could barely see anything. I got stuck on things more than once, not even sure what I was stuck on each time. I doubled back to the parking lot, following the bar's lights and praying the wolf was taking the longer route behind me. Breaking free of the woods into the parking lot, I noticed I was leaving large parts of my costume behind me. My legs were mostly exposed already, which, as a lady of the 90s, I was already used to. The stitches were coming loose further and further up my legs, though, so I was soon going to have more than just a Dogman problem. I was going to have a wardrobe malfunction. We didn't even have that term back then, but you know what I'm saying. I had Groucho's car keys and made a beeline for his vehicle. Getting in and slamming the door behind me, I looked around frantically for the monster who had been chasing me. I spotted him finally back at the edge of the forest. He was glaring at me with those glowing eyes, but he wasn't coming back out into the parking lot. I watched him and he watched me for the better part of another hour before Groucho came out to see why I had been gone so long. I let him in the car and he immediately asked what had happened to my costume. I pointed to the Dogman at the edge of the woods, but noticed he was gone now. Thinking quickly, I told Groucho that some nut job in the forest had grabbed me and ripped my costume. He apologized profusely and drove me home right away. I have to say he was a good guy about the whole thing. He blamed himself because he left me alone in a parking lot in the middle of nowhere. But in his defense, I hadn't thought anyone would be around to bother me. At any rate, the thing I saw was dark and furry and tall. I would say over 6 feet since I had to look up to it, and I would have been around 5'7" that night since I was wearing very high-heeled boots. It had tall, pointed ears, but the main thing I noticed about it was definitely the eyes. I've never seen an animal's eyes that looked like that ever again. It was almost more like a lizard's eyes, maybe. They didn't look like dog or wolf eyes to me, and they glowed like yellow-orange fireflies. I've never seen anything like that since, although I did once see a UFO in the early 2000s on a vacation in Florida, if you ever want to hear about that. And so now you've heard about the story of how Catwoman got away from Dogman.
Dogman wins, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was a kid back in the 1970s, my father had an ongoing Halloween competition with the dad next door. They both wanted to be king of the suburbs when it came to their Halloween decorations. When it came to Christmas, Dad would just string up a few lights, but when Halloween came around, we always had a huge show going on. Dad figured out how to make objects move remotely. He had zombies hidden in graves on our front lawn, and when people would walk down the block, he would watch from inside secretly. As the neighbor got to the right spot, Dad would hit a button inside, and somehow a fake zombie mannequin would pop up out of the ground and send the neighbor away screaming for their lives. Dad would always laugh so hard that his face would turn red, and he would cough for a while. That would lead to my mother lecturing him that too much happiness was the devil's playground, or something like that, and then they would argue. As soon as the fighting was done, though, Dad was back at his station, waiting for the next fly to walk into his trap. As the years went on, he developed more ways to surprise and scare people, and our home became a place people would visit on purpose at Halloween, looking to be frightened. When the next-door neighbor put a zombie cemetery in his backyard and allowed strangers to come in for free to tour the graveyard, Dad lost his mind. By the next October, he had me help him build a haunted maze in the backyard that had Mom arguing with him twice daily. She was really against the entire idea, but Dad was a man obsessed. He needed to be the suburban king of Halloween. By the time I was 13, Dad's mania had led him to purchasing the property behind our house and demolishing it, thereby creating a direct path from our house to a patch of woods that was either part of the state forest or connected to a state forest. I was never really sure who owned that patch of woods, but now we owned the pathway to it. Dad fenced the place off until Halloween and labored alone like a mad scientist, not even forcing me to help him anymore. Mom grew worried, but I was so happy to not have to spend every afternoon helping my loony dad that I kept telling her Dad was perfectly okay. So when Halloween season opened that year, what was beyond Dad's fence was as much a mystery to me and the family as it was to our neighbors. What we saw was a patch of woods, kind of the same as it had always been, but Dad had a weird, subtle lighting and remains of parts of signs pointing in confusing directions and warning of things that were no longer specified. I looked with wide open eyes at what Dad had created and wished him luck. Then I turned around to leave. This was too scary looking for me, and I wanted no part of it. How had he used lights, yet made the place seem darker somehow? Even today, just thinking about that year's Halloween gives me a twinge of electric fear in my belly. So anyway, Dad didn't let me leave. He grabbed me by the arm and led me into his dark creation. He had a special job for me, he told me. We walked deeper and deeper into the woods. They seemed much larger and more dense than they ever had before. I used to take this shortcut past the old house all the time when walking to the library, but it never seemed frightening until now. It seemed like we walked a mile, and I wondered if I could figure out my way back when Dad said we had reached the spot. There was something furry on the ground, and I recoiled in horror. Dad called me rude names and told me I was acting afraid of my own costume. Costume? I looked, and sure enough, it was an Ewok costume that Dad had altered and put these big fangs into the mouth of. He told me to put the costume on, then hang out behind this bush there and wait for people to walk by. When they did, I was supposed to jump up and down and screech at them. Then they'll run away, said Dad. No, they won't, I said. They'll bop me in the nose for being a little jerk is what they'll do. Dad insisted nobody was going to bop me on the nose, then said that it wouldn't hurt as much to get bopped on the nose anyway if I was wearing the Ewok mask, so I better put it on. Then he left, and I was alone in the forest primeval, dressed as a teddy bear from space with fangs, and hoping that nobody would bop me for being dressed like this. I wondered what I should do. Disobey my dad so that I didn't get people angry at me, or obey my dad so I didn't get a spanking later. It seemed like no matter what I chose to do, I was going to be the loser in the end. That's when I heard a sound in the forest, and my initial instinct was to duck down and hide. I was too scared to be there. I really wanted to go home and watch TV. Assuming it was one of the neighbors, I figured I'd better sneak a peek at them and see if they looked like the kind who would have a good sense of humor or not. So I peeked over the bushes in the direction of the sounds, but I did not see a person there at all. I saw a dog. Or maybe it was a wolf or a coyote. It was in the dark in silhouette. I could only make out its head, really. What a relief, at least it wasn't one of the neighbors. I called out to the dog, "Here, puppy." As I watched, the dog turned and saw me. I couldn't see its expression in the dark, but I saw that it was standing up. I thought it was already standing up, so this was a surprise. That dog head rose to the height of a really tall dog. Then it kept on rising higher. The dog stood up like a man, a very, very tall man. That's when I realized it must be someone else my dad had hired to scare the neighbors. I hoped. Nervously, I asked him just that. Was he working for my father? Was he part of the crew? He didn't answer. Or maybe he did, but he didn't answer in words. He answered by growling. If this was an actor, he must have been an award-winning one. I booked it out of there, running toward what I hoped was the direction of my family's house. I could hear the dog or whatever it was tearing up the forest behind me, and I never felt so terrified before. I squealed and ran, pushing past signs and knocking down a few random fake gravestones Dad had placed around. Some kind of real wild animal must have wandered in from the forest. I wasn't sure yet what was chasing me, but I knew it wasn't someone's pet, and it wasn't a person in a costume. Breaking through into my backyard screaming, I hoped someone would help me or give me a place to hide from the monster. Instead, they pointed and laughed. They thought this was part of the show. And why shouldn't they? I ran around the house and stopped around a corner trying to catch my breath. I peeked back and saw the creature in full for the first and only time. It was standing twice as tall as the men, looking down and sort of half screaming and half barking at everyone. It snapped at them and they pulled away, laughing the entire time. They must have thought it was some sort of trick. It didn't look real, and yet there was nothing else it could be. It had the head of a crazed wolf with pointed ears and darker fur than I'd ever seen on wolves before. Despite the dog head, it had the body of a kind of a Sasquatch-looking creature. Or maybe like a dark bear, but it moved much more quickly than a bear and seemed much more used to being on its hind legs than a bear would be. The way it ran wasn't like a dog or a bear or an ape or a human exactly. It just sort of ran like a monster. I decided to try to sneak into the house and hide in the confusion when someone grabbed me from behind, holding their hand over my mouth. I struggled and I kicked hard, which caused a very familiar voice to tell me to cut it out. Looking upward, I saw that it was my father. He snuck me quietly into the house, and we watched from the kitchen window as the Dogman crashed into the woods and disappeared. The crowd applauded as though this were a scheduled performance. My father told me to throw out the Ewok costume and never speak of this again. He then proceeded to go outside and lie to all the neighbors that they had just witnessed an actual werewolf chasing an actual juvenile Sasquatch across his property. Needless to say, he won the Halloween Wars for that year. Or maybe I should say, Dogman won. Don't go away. Right after this break, we've got the Dogman of Austin, Texas.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The Dogman of Austin, Texas, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. This story actually took place in Mayfield Park, which is a nature preserve. I remembered it being in Austin, but it looks like it might actually be in nearby Tarrytown according to this map I'm looking at. Either way, this story took place when I used to live in Austin in the early part of the 21st century. Now, Austin has a reputation of being weird, and everyone there is very proud of it. But nobody that I ever met the entire time I stayed over there was ever as weird as the Dogman. So like I said, one day I went to Mayfield Park, brought there by a girl who had lived in Austin longer than I had. She wanted to show me her secret place in the park where she liked to sit. She told me she always wished she could sit there with someone else, so I got elected for the gig. When we finally found the area she liked so much, it was not what I was expecting. The area seemed to be built on the edge of a cliff, and there were stone walls to keep you from walking off the edge. The view was remarkable, but that wasn't what she brought me here to see. We walked a few feet away from the wall overlooking the forest far below and found a bench facing away from the magnificent view. Why would they have built and stationed this bench facing in that direction? There was just a bunch of trees over there. Still, this is where the girl wanted to sit, so I sat with her and then stared at a bunch of trees for a while. She asked me if I didn't love it, and I said I couldn't argue that I didn't. After a while, something shifted. I mean, it felt like everything changed somehow. Maybe the atmosphere changed or the ions in the air became different. It felt like everything suddenly was vibrating at a different frequency, like as though there were a sound present now that wasn't there before. The air tasted differently, and everything felt electric. I smelled matches and tasted metal. "Do you feel it?" the girl asked me, and I could see her hair rising around her face. It was floating in the air and rising higher all the time. What was happening? Were we about to get hit by lightning? We both heard a sound from the trees, and immediately both our views were drawn to the small forest in front of us. There, we saw two immense hands reach out and part a couple of medium-sized trees. The hands looked like they were 6 feet off the ground, and the strength they were demonstrating was superhuman in my estimation. Suddenly horrified, I remember backing up on the bench so I was now sitting up on the back of it higher than the girl, Why I didn't run, I'm not sure. I guess I just wanted to see what was going to walk out of those trees. I'm not sure I really should have stayed. I think it might have been a better thing if I never saw what was in those woods, because it wasn't something that made sense, either then or now. It wasn't something that could have been there, and yet it was there. My brain and mind are disconnected from each other ever since then. I don't trust my own eyes anymore, even when I'm with someone else who is seeing exactly the same thing. My entire world got turned on its head in that next moment, because when those trees parted, this thing walked out that looked like some kind of demonic, hairy, dog-headed monster. It was angry before it had a reason to be. Then it saw us, and it got angrier. That was my impression of it, that it was nothing but a manifestation of savagery itself. I should have looked away. I should have run. I should have done anything but continue to sit there in the presence of this foul and unholy beast. This was not something that belonged in our world. This was not something it was healthy to be near. So why was I not running? Why was I not walking away? Why was I not at least looking away from it? The girl was saying something, and I realized that the air was so charged, it was hard to make out words from her speech. This was almost like an altered state of consciousness, yet it was affecting us both at the same time. I focused on her lips, and it seemed that she was saying, "This isn't the place we really are. We aren't actually seeing this from here." "Where are we seeing this from?" I asked, and the monster screeched in pain and horror. I was hurting it physically by asking questions about it. Nothing was making any sense, and the next thing I remember is waking up the next morning, feeling like I had the worst hangover of my life. I never saw that girl again, so I never got her side of the story. I was told that she moved out with no advance warning, but she had left money to cover her share of the rent, so nobody even bothered her about it. I guess this all happened while I was asleep. Nobody had any info about how I ended up back in my own bed. They looked at me strangely for even asking the question. I guess they all assumed I had a psychedelic experience of some kind. And actually, I guess that most likely they were correct, at least in some way. What is the strange power that the Dogman has over human consciousness? Is it a real thing that actually looks like a werewolf? Or is it something or someone else that only makes us think that it looks like a dog-headed, hairy man monster? Maybe the Dogman isn't just a beast. Maybe the Dogman is some kind of life form far more sophisticated than human beings. Maybe Dogman is a bit too much for us to even understand.
We go where no robot has gone before.
Now let's get started with our first Dogman tale. The Dogman with steaming red eyes, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I've had 3 things happen to me that felt as though they were paranormal. One was a poltergeist event I saw in my friend's kitchen where a salt shaker slid right off a table. A second was when I recorded myself doing a podcast, and while I was breathing in at one point, it sounded like there was an EVP of a man whispering the name Helen. Obviously that's not my name, but according to my mother, The lady who owned the house before us was named Helen. But by far, the scariest paranormal thing that ever happened to me was when I saw a real Dogman. I bet some of you out there are wondering why I'm calling the Dogman paranormal, but if you had seen this thing, you wouldn't be asking that question. It was a beast straight from hell. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. This was the last weekend before my senior year at high school began. I was staying at my friend's house. Let's call him Evan, which is not his real name. His family is very rich compared to mine, and their house is in the middle of this forest. It takes 3 minutes to drive up their driveway to the house through the woods. There's all sorts of crazy wild stuff in that forest. Rock outcroppings, 3 caves that I know of, and a man-made cave that Evan and his family always insisted to me was there when they bought the property. They had no idea who built it or how old it was, but it was a tunnel cut into the rock that extended back a ways and ended in a natural stream flowing out of the rock itself. As amazing as that little cave was, I always wanted to get out as soon as I was in. It's not that the place felt evil. In fact, it seemed to be a holy site of some sort or another. It's just that nobody was able to tell if it had been built in the 20th century or if it had been built in extremely ancient times. There was something about that which frightened me back then. I think I was paranoid I might leave the cave and find myself in another century. The place felt powerful, but it was a power I couldn't be certain to be able to control. Of the natural caves, 2 out of 3 of them ended very quickly and had no side passages. The third one, though, led to an opening in the back which you had to walk through bent over. Once you got through it, though, it entered into a wider area which had more exits than we had dared to investigate. Neither of us had ever gone deeper than that second chamber, which was always hot, no matter the season. It was hot in the summer and in the winter. Since this was autumn when we went in there, it was hot. It was always hot there. Evan pointed at one of the holes in the cave wall on the opposite side of the chamber. He asked me if I could see something in that tunnel. I stared and I thought I was seeing something there, but I couldn't be sure. I shone my flashlight all around the opening, trying to angle the light to allow me to see deeper, but the tunnel seemed to turn at a sharp angle, preventing me from seeing much. I was about to tell Evan that I hadn't seen anything when I definitely saw something. Something that might best be described as a prehistoric dog's head was suddenly in the view of my flashlight, drooling, slobbering, and baring its fangs. The eyes of this thing looked like they were burning from the inside and were colored a dark orange that was nearly red. Smoke billowed out of the eyes as though they were actually made of burning coal. This was not just a big scary animal. This was a big scary animal from hell. I was so surprised I dropped my flashlight. Bending down and reaching around for it, I got my hand stomped on by Evan as he got his butt out of that cave. He also kicked my flashlight further away from me and closer to the prehistoric dog. I could now hear the creature growling, and my stomach did a flip. Abandoning the flashlight, I raced out of the cave, following the little glimpses of Evan's flashlight off the cave walls in the distance. I could hear the creature behind me, and I was crying. I didn't think I would make it out, and it was absolutely terrifying. I am very lucky my legs were running on adrenaline because I think the rest of me was nearly in shock. I got to the tunnel where I had to bend over to get through and dove in head first, running on all fours as quickly as I could through the narrow shaft. I was making pretty good time in the darkness with a glimmer of light off in the distance barely lighting my way. Then, I guess I moved up when I should have moved down, and I scraped my back against a sharp rock on the ceiling that I hadn't noticed in time. It was very painful for the first few seconds, and I dropped down enduring the pain until I could get used to it. My eyes were shut, and I was just focused on getting past the pain so I could resume my escape. I opened my eyes, and behind me, in the darkness, I saw eye shine. The pain minimized itself with another adrenaline rush, and I was off again, hugging the floor and trying to avoid hurting my back anymore. I could hear the creature getting closer. I could hear its breathing and its scuffling over the rocks and gravel behind me. I was crying and thinking that this was not how I wanted to die, and this was not where I wanted to die. I slid out of that tunnel, literally somersaulted, and was off running through the entrance chamber toward the outside world. When I got out, Evan was waiting for me like a good friend. I screamed at him that he was an idiot and told him to run. We both took off at our top speed. At one point there was a roar behind us, but it was fairly far behind. I risked taking a look behind me, and I saw the thing that I had first taken as a prehistoric dog. It was standing outside of the cave entrance, screaming at us, but it wasn't chasing after us anymore. And it also wasn't a dog, or it wasn't the kind that stands on all fours. This was a Dogman. It stood like a man. It screamed like a wounded horse. It had a feral dog's head, claws larger than I'd ever seen on any animal, and smoking red burning coal eyes. I couldn't help myself. I just stopped and stared. I gawked like a tourist in Times Square. I was looking at a man-like thing that wasn't supposed to exist. It had grayish, brownish fur all over and pointed ears on top of its head. It was kinda shaggy, but fairly well kept for a demon dog. I don't remember ever noticing an odor from it, but then again, I was fortunate enough never to get too close to it. I wonder if it smelled like fire and brimstone. I'm open to suggestion if you can explain how that might not have been something paranormal or supernatural that we witnessed that evening. Do animals' eyes smoke in nature? Are there other creatures with eyes that seem to glow? What could cause that appearance on a creature? I don't really know how big this thing was, since at first I only saw the head, and then, when I finally saw it in full, I was looking up a hill to see it in the distance. I feel like it was 6 feet tall, like the size of a fairly tall man. I can't swear to that, though. It might have been larger or smaller. Maybe I'm superstitious or something, but if something lives in a cave underground, has red, steaming, smoking charcoal eyes, and has a dog head while walking on its hind legs, then maybe, just maybe, that's not a natural animal. And I don't even know exactly what I mean by that. What is natural as opposed to supernatural, really? I've got no answers, but I will probably always have a lot of questions about the Dogman with the steaming red eyes. Don't go away, we've got another Dogman story right after this.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
I think I might be a Dogman, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I live in a new suburban development located near a small and old community of farmers. My family is friends with some of the families who have been here for generations. They tell us that their livestock and pets are being preyed upon by a very large wolf-dog hybrid that seems as comfortable walking around on its hind legs as on its all fours. One report said that the creature walked away from a farm with a young calf under each arm. Multiple reports state that the animal or entity seems unfazed by rifles being fired on it, even from a close range. Although it's hardly known about in our gated community, the people living on the farms nearby are all quite in a tizzy about this alleged monster. Nobody in my community who has heard of the beast thinks it's real. Not even my parents. But I know it's real. And I think it might be me. Now, I didn't pick up on all this until the third appearance of the beast, but all the sightings are clustered around the full moon. It's either the day of the full moon or the day before or after when people say he appears and menaces their families and livestock. I saw a movie on TV, not a documentary or a serious movie. I think it was on Svengoolie or something. In this movie, this guy changes into a monster when it's the full moon. And get this, the monster he changes into is part man and part wolf. So I was thinking, right from that point, that the creature might be a human who changed into the animal. I thought it would be a brujo or a shaman or a wizard of some sort doing it on purpose. Or else I thought it might be a curse placed on somebody. In either case, for some reason, I didn't entertain much thought about who it might be. I guess, coming from a big city, I assumed it would turn out to be someone I had never met. This creature, like the one in the old movie I saw, is basically humanoid and covered in hair. Unlike the monster from the movie, however, this one does not wear clothes when he is seen skulking about. The farmers don't think of it as a man, but as an animal, in part for this reason. The creature has a head much more like that of a dog or a wolf than the one in the movie did. Its snout is pronounced and long, ending in a dog-like black nose. Its fur is mostly gray, with darker and lighter parts throughout. Its ears stand up high on its head and dart about quickly, able to judge direction and proximity of the softest noises from the greatest distances. Its eyes are said to be cold and merciless. This is a thing that was born to kill and to eat. If it learned mercy, it would die the next day. It's pointless to hate it, and unwise not to fear it. A few months back, a girl in my school told me she saw the monster the night before, and she brought her cat inside. They both watched it through the window as it walked through her family's yard. She told me it stomped her mother's roses as it walked right through them, then seemed to scream in pain from the thorns. My arms had been covered in deep, fresh scratches that morning. I was stunned at the synchronicity. What were the chances that both the Dogman and myself were both scratched by a rose bush the night before? And it was especially weird how I didn't remember getting scratched. Life can be really strange, so I shrugged it off. I have nightmares now where I'm running on all fours and it's exhilarating. Then I encounter some stupid man, some little man, some man who thinks he's better than me. I stand up on my hind legs and I look down on him. He is so small, small enough for a snack. Look at him run. I bet I could catch him without even trying. I race after the man, and it doesn't take long to catch up. Soon, I have his neck in my sights. I know how to do it in one quick move while running at full speed. It won't take long. It's always over so quickly. I lean in, and that's when I always wake up, sweat pouring off of me, feeling in a complete state of panic. In my dreams, I'm the hunter, but I always wake up identifying fully with the prey. I wish they would catch the upright canid plaguing the community. I think it would make my nightmares stop. I woke up with chicken feathers in my bed last month. I woke up with broken eggs in my bed this month. Always on the full moon. Am I sleepwalking? Is it possible I might be sort of sympathetically sleepwalking because of the Dogman sightings occurring on the full moon? I mean, just because I find strange things in my bed the morning after the full moon doesn't necessarily mean I'm a wolf man. But I have to admit, I'm currently my own number one suspect. I don't think anyone around here believes in shape-shifting humanoid monsters. I think that even if people found their missing calves in my closet, they still wouldn't associate me with the monster they had seen in their fields. They might think I found the calves and brought them home, but they wouldn't think I was a shapeshifter. There are no superstitious people around here. I say that even while understanding the irony that this may be one of those few cases in which the superstition is more believable than the so-called reality. So what do I do? Turn myself into the werewolf police? Even if I tried to take the blame, I just don't think people would believe me. On the other hand, I don't want to hurt any animals, and the longer this goes on, the more the likelihood increases that I might hurt a person as well. This is all assuming I am actually turning into a wolfman or a dogman, and I don't actually know that for sure. I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know how I should proceed from here or what my main priority should even be. I can't afford to put locks and bars on my windows and doors, and I don't think my parents would allow that anyway. I'm really honestly just not sure what to do. But I better decide quickly before the next full moon. The witch who summons the Dogman, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I come from Pennsylvania, and my grandmother and mother both used to tell my brother and me stories about werewolves and boogeymen when we were young. They were always cautionary tales. If you misbehaved, then either the boogeyman or the werewolves would get you. If you disobeyed your parents, then they would get you too. Sometimes you could do everything right and live a perfectly virtuous life, and still the werewolves and boogeyman would get you, just because life can be that way. This was the moral of every story. You'd better try not to get taken by monsters, but probably you'll get taken by monsters anyway. Now, in these stories and legends, the boogeymen were essentially like Bigfoot. I imagine them looking like the boogeymen from the Laurel and Hardy March of the Wooden Soldiers movie, and those look a lot like Bigfoot. Sort of primitive, violent, unintelligent proto-humans that are dangerous to be around. But they were natural to the area. Grandmother said they were here before the Native Americans got here. The werewolves, on the other hand, were a different kind of animal altogether. They were not werewolves like in the movies. They were not shapeshifters. They were not really animals at all, at least not in the conventional sense. These were something like demons, and they were summoned by the old witch in the woods. Grandma said the old witch was old even when Grandma was young, and she'll still be old when my grandchildren have grandchildren. That gave me the shudders. Grandma said the old witch made a new werewolf appear every time someone was cruel to someone else when they didn't have to be. So, each murder in the world creates a new werewolf, but so does every act of injustice, every door not held, every thank you not expressed. Even the most minor of sins created an undying, savage, vicious werewolf, according to Grandma and my mother. I thought I was a wise guy because I interpreted it to be meant figuratively. Each of our sins can snowball and become something much larger and worse and more grotesque than the worst sin we could have done in the first place. Living with integrity saved so much future suffering. It was metaphor. It was poetry. I thought it was brilliant, and that I was too. I was wrong in both cases. Mom and Grandma were just being literal, and they were warning me. So, one day I was taking a walk in the woods and I came across an old lady. She didn't look like something out of a fairy story. She wasn't wearing a torn dress out of medieval times. She was wearing a Gallagher 2 t-shirt and mom jeans, and she used a walker. Her hair was curly and white. Her hearing aid was prominent, and her look was annoyed. "What time is it?" she shouted at me, more in order than a question. I told her the time, whatever it was. She screamed that she couldn't hear me, so I held up my phone and let her read the time, then kept walking. She was already the most annoying thing in my day, and I just met her. "That was rude," she shouted, and I swear the skies darkened, and thunder rumbled all around in 3D stereo quadraphonic. It was like something out of the corniest movie you ever saw, except it was real, and it was very humbling. "You shouldn't ever be mean to old ladies," she screamed. You shouldn't, not ever, you shouldn't, not ever." She seemed to be having a fit. She was gyrating and doing little half spins from side to side. She looked like she didn't feel well. I wanted to help her, but then I realized she's crazy, and I'd be smart to get away from her immediately. So, staring over my shoulder at her, I walked away, and bam! That's right. I walked straight into a huge, upright, walking dog, then fell hard on my back, looking up at it. The lady had her eyes shut and was still mumbling angrily. The dog stared at me, and steam rose out of its eyes and nostrils, even though this was a warm night. I was helpless, laying there on the ground before this unimaginable beast. I remembered in detail every story I'd been told about the werewolves, and I cried, knowing I had never pictured them looking like this one did. It was like a husky, but with satanic eyes. Evil, horrible eyes that denied the value of life itself. Eyes that looked with disdain toward anything good or pure in the world. The great beast bent down and screamed in my face. I could smell years of rot from inside it, and I wanted to be ill and die. My life went past in chronological order, and I felt as though I were ready to go. Then, the monstrous dog stood up, turned around, and walked thunderously away to I know not where. I turned and looked at the witch, who was laughing. "Oh, the wolf, he's not going to hurt you," she kept giggling to herself like it was the funniest thing in the world. "He's born out of your sin. Now he's going to go hurt other people. Lots of other people." I got away from that evil old witch, and I try not to think of her ever since, but I do anyway. I know that somewhere in the world, no matter the time or day, there is someone experiencing misery. Misery born out of my sin. My one brief act of carelessness and thoughtlessness manifests and manifests over and over as ever increasing sadness and unhappiness. And it's all because of the witch who summons Dogman.
Have you heard our secret sheep squash story? If you were a paid subscriber, you would have.
The Dogman that challenged my German Shepherd, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was in my 20s, I had a great dog named Bessie who guarded our house for us. She was very fit and athletic and friendly, but she would turn absolutely savage in the case of someone trying to get on our property who didn't belong there. I never saw her back down from a fight, except for this one time I'm going to tell you about. The time when Bessie got challenged to a fight by an actual Dogman. That house had a small to medium-sized backyard surrounded by woods. We had no fence, but I would let Bessie out into the yard and let her play. She would do her business by bushes and cover it up, but she would never venture any further into the forest than that. She was a really smart and loyal dog, and we had a close and trusting relationship. So, one night when she was outside and I was inside, I heard her barking in the backyard. She sounded angry, but also alarmed. I didn't like to hear Bessie's alarmed bark. I had really only heard it 2 times before, I guess. One time when a pack of coyotes were checking us out from the woods, and another time when a bear stumbled upon our yard. Or maybe the bear story happened after this, I can't remember for sure. I think Bessie would have been around 3 or 4 when this story happened. She was quite fit, and although she had never been violent, I had no idea she could be if she were defending me or our property. So I rushed to get outside, wanting to shoo whatever it was away before something unfixable got broken. When I got outside, I didn't have to wait long to find out what was causing the trouble. Standing right there in front of the wood line, staring down at my furiously barking dog, was another dog. I guess. I mean, it sure looked like a dog head was on its body. The trouble was that its body didn't resemble a dog's body very much at all. I wondered if it was a guy in a costume, but it was too tall to be that. And the head seemed so real. Its ears moved the way a dog's ears would move, but its body was like a very, very tall, somewhat chubby man. It had long, shaggy fur all over, including on top of its head, where it flopped all over, covering its ears and eyes. Although my dog was extremely agitated, the immense standing man-beast just stood there with his tongue out, panting like any other dog would do, and watching my German Shepherd casually. The détente in the situation changed rapidly as Bessie lurched forward and took a nip out of the man-dog's front paw. First, the giant beast squealed in pain, sounding like a puppy much smaller than itself, and it pulled back. Then, in a quick second, it got furious and roared at Bessie, taking a bite at my dog at the end of the roar, but missing. For the only time in her life, Bessie turned tail and ran. She ran right past me toward the house, and I realized I'd better get to the door to let both of us in. The Dogman was running after us, and I could see how long its strides were by how quickly it covered the distance from those trees to our back porch. We got in literally seconds before the creature reached our door. I ran away after locking it, fully expecting the creature to break the door down and come in to end everything for me in my own home. But that's not what the Dogman did. It sat down outside our back door and scratched at the door, like he was asking to be let in. I did not let him in. I ran up to my bedroom. I tried to find a window with a view looking down on the back door of the house so I could monitor what the creature did, but none of our upstairs windows had a good angle. So I just got quiet and I listened. I didn't hear anything happen for a long time, and eventually I realized the man dog had left at some point. When? I don't know. The next day or sometime after that, I got a tape measure to find out the height of this one branch I saw the creature stand next to, and it was 8 feet 2 inches. That seems impossibly tall, so maybe it was just an optical illusion from my angle that his head was the same height as that branch. But even if I'm off, that creature was much larger than an average man. Because of its shagginess, I don't really know if it was muscular. The fur made it look kind of round, but the front arms were clearly very strong, and the hind legs even stronger. Vince McMahon would have signed this guy to a lifetime contract in a second. It was the biggest man I'd ever seen or expect to ever see. And even though it looked friendly when it stood there panting, when it went for my dog, that was not play. It had the biggest teeth I've ever seen in my life, and they were clearly the teeth of a hunter, not a vegetarian. My dog and I are lucky we escaped unharmed from our encounter with the Dogman that challenged my German Shepherd.
Feel that cold breeze? That means your future best friend, Dr. Death, is here. Oh, don't worry. It's not your time yet. But it is time for us to get down to some serious Halloween Dogman business in this month of October 2022. Bigfoot's gonna be presenting allegedly true Dogman stories as many days of the month as he physically can, while I, Dr. Death, will scare the living daylights out of you on Mondays. Yes, each October Monday until that most Monday-ish Monday of all, Halloween Monday 2022. So we'll see you this Monday, I do hope. On YouTube, I mean. I already told you, it's not your time just yet.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
back for more scary stories.